So when we're talking about embodied carbon, I just want to remind everyone that we're really talking about building materials and their impacts, and mostly as they pertain to climate and carbon emissions, but also, how they impact human health and different ecosystems. Um, when we think about the major building materials, we're talking about concrete, and concrete is actually the second most used resource in the world behind water. So it has a very big climate impact, and we are trying to figure out ways to mitigate that. So again, building materials and their impacts, those impacts are immediate. They're being realized right now as buildings are being constructed. For a long time, we've focused on operational carbon, which is, the energy that a building uses over its lifetime. So that's kind of in this blue area here. But these orange bars are the embodied carbon, and they are really big impact and something that we can impact now. So that's the focus of a lot of this work that we've been doing. And where that impact comes from, most of it comes from the structure and envelope of a building. So the beams, columns, roof, flooring, insulation, glass on the exterior, that makes up 80% of the embodied carbon of a building, and only 10% is in the finishes, the ceiling tiles, wall boards, and carpeting. So most of our focus is going to be on that high impact 80%. So our first MTAP that we did back in 2003 with ULI, that group came up with an embodied carbon action plan for us. They came out with steps for us to follow on this journey over about 5 years. So near term, focusing on education awareness, then working to actually quantify embodied carbon in Buckhead and create baselines, then maybe move towards a voluntary reporting program, and ultimately update our zoning code to incorporate some type of embodied carbon reduction reporting and reduction requirements. So our second MTAP focused on that baseline that was conducted in May of 2024. So they weren't able to actually go out and measure every building in Buckhead, but they looked at literature out there and came up with the embodied carbon intensity of a typical building, which is this baseline. And they looked at the, simple material swaps or design decisions that could be made that would lower the carbon intensity of the building. So they said, pretty easy steps could see an 11% reduction in carbon emissions, and kind of going towards the best practices, you can realistically see a 22% in carbon emissions on a per building basis. They also went out and looked at the availability of these proposed lower carbon materials in the Atlanta market, and we were very encouraged to find that they were readily available and often come at zero price premium. Some things can even be found at a price discount. So it does not cost more money to build more sustainable. So that was all good. It can be done from a technical perspective, but we wanted to see what the community thought about embodied carbon and if this is something that makes sense for us to pursue. So in the 2024 State of Buckhead survey, we asked the public if they were just familiar with embodied carbon, and unsurprisingly, most people said that they were not. That's seen here. So then we presented everyone with a definition for embodied carbon and asked them if they thought it was important. And a majority of folks said that it was at least moderately to extremely important. So again, that was encouraging and, informed us to continue on this work. So the MTAPs and what Denise and I have been working on as well is looking at what other cities are doing to address this problem. And it's really been led by cities, not the federal government. So places like Cambridge, Boston, California, Denver, Seattle, New York, they are all putting in place either zoning codes or building codes to require more sustainable building materials. And there's a lot of excitement around this, a lot of good press where these regulations are in place. There's some really exciting projects going in. So we see this as an opportunity to bring publicity to Buckhead, see some market differentiation and show that we are interested in bringing in innovative projects and companies that are interested in locating in sustainable buildings. So, what are the actual policies that these cities are enacting? Most of them fall into two categories: prescriptive and performance-based programs. So prescriptive programs, they often regulate specific materials like the concrete and the steel, and require more sustainable alternatives, whereas performance-based programs usually look at the building as a whole and require some sort of measurement to reduce the overall emissions of the building, not just for specific categories of materials. So now here's where we're going to get a little wonky, but I do have to give you guys some definitions so that we can all be on the same page. So first thing to understand is a life cycle assessment, often called an LCA. And this is a measurement of a product, a building, a service where, scientists will go in and look at all the things that happen over the life cycle of a material and add it all up to come up with a single number to describe that project's life cycle emissions. So if you're thinking of a black cotton t-shirt, the resources coming for it, the cotton, the black coloring, the electricity going into making it, the transportation, the packaging, all those things add up to a number that's called the global warming potential. So here you can see this black shirt has the global warming potential of 4.85 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per shirt. So that's a life cycle assessment, and that's the global warming potential. To make it a little bit easier to compare projects or products, the industry has come out with environmental product declarations, EPDs. So these are kind of like a nutrition label for products that show their climate impact. So this is an EPD for a specific type of concrete. Its global warming potential is 271. And so now if an architect is looking to decide what type of concrete they want to use, they can go into a database and look at all the concrete that has these specific performance metrics and compare products based on this global warming potential. And within these databases, a lot of them will have these kind of box plots where they show the best performing products and the worst, and kind of the middle 50% of where most of the products are. So, usually picking a product within this middle range is a good bet.
And are those metrics standardized throughout the country?
So that is a topic of contention. This is relatively new. So standardization processes are still a work in progress.
Okay.
But they are increasing, the transparency of the industry as a whole. And as more people are interested in sustainable building materials, more manufacturers are putting out these EPDs. But it does cost money for them to go through this process. So, the big players are creating these EPDs. The small folks, they're a little bit lagging. So once you have EPDs for all the products in your building, you can then do a whole building life cycle assessment for your whole building. And with that, again, you'll get a single number that is your embodied carbon intensity for your building. And it's usually measured in emissions per square footage. So once you have the embodied carbon intensity of your building, you can then compare your building performance to others. So this is a data set of like 100 buildings in Ontario where they conducted LCAs for their buildings, and then they grouped them based on category. So, residential small buildings over here, these are the best performers, these are the worst, and this is kind of the middle group. Large residential buildings, commercial office. So this is what we're looking at when we're talking about the embodied carbon intensity of a building.
The lower the number, the better, right?
Lower the number, the better. Yes, that's correct. And again, this is on a per square footage basis. So this, that you might have a 20-story building that has a low number per square footage. You might have a small building that has a high. So it doesn't, this isn't the total embodied carbon in a building. It's just on a square footage basis, but that's what people are using to compare buildings. Okay, so going back to this prescriptive versus performance, knowing all the lingo that we just went through. So prescriptive programs, like we said, look at specific building materials. So they might, a policy might say you can only use concrete that has a score of 200 or less. That's prescriptive. And then the performance-based says to a building, you can only have a carbon intensity number of 500 or less, but there's more flexibility in how a project team gets there. So they might use some bad concrete, but they use a lot of good recycled steel. So these 2 embodied carbon workshops that we've been working on, the goal of them is to determine which of these pathways is going to work best for our community and how we can enforce these policies.